Hi class, let's continue our journey on emotion and motivation. Okay, let's review some things from last class. The game is called Which Cognitive Theory of Emotion That Is? First example. You witness an external stimulus. Then the stimulus leads to a physiological response. Your emotional reaction depends on your interpretation of the physical response. Which cognitive theory of emotion this example demonstrates? It is the James Lange theory of emotion. It argues that emotions result from our interpretations of our bodily reaction to stimuli. So, bodily reaction first, then our interpretation of our bodily reaction. Then we generate an emotion about it. Okay. Next example. Sarah is walking to her favorite restaurant. On her way, she sees her boyfriend Gabriel on a date with her best friend Taylor. Sarah's heart rate increased rapidly and her blood pressure rose. Simultaneously, she began to feel angry. Of course, she feels angry. Which theory this example demonstrates? It is the Cannon-Bard theory of emotion. It argues that an emotion-evoking event leads simultaneously to an emotion and bodily reaction. So the keyword here in this example is simultaneously. So the bodily reaction and the emotion happen at the same time. Okay. Now we will finish the last three parts of this chapter. Happiness and self-esteem. So what is happiness good for? Consider a study that has tracked a group of 180 nuns in Wisconsin for 6 decades. These nuns had kept daily diary starting in the 1930s, when they were in their early 20s. Nuns whose sentences featured many positive words, such as distilling with love, joy, and hope, outlived other nuns by an average of 10 years. Of course, correlation is not causation, but is still pretty cool. Okay, so happiness can have adaptive features. One theory is called broaden and build theory. It argues that happiness makes us think more openly and we may find novel solutions to problems or seek more opportunities. On one test of this theory, doctors who received a small bag of candy made a more accurate diagnosis of liver disease than did other doctors. Apparently, because being in a good mood allowed them to consider alternative diagnostic possibilities. So, on your next visit to the doctor, bring a bag of candy. Optimists tend to be happier in everyday life and tend to live longer than pessimists. So, you decide. So, what do you think are some things that are correlated with happiness? Let's see some myth and the reality. First, the myth is people who are more positive have more positive life events. The reality is research shows happy people don't necessarily experience more positive life events than others. So it's more like a mindset than what things really happen to people. Next, money. People believe that money makes us happy. But the reality is both yes and no. If you make less than $75,000 a year, there is a modest correlation between wealth and happiness. However, if we are making more than that, it doesn't seem to matter much, although to the extent that money and happiness are related, it tends to be relative. In other words, if people we know are wealthier than us, we may be less happy, regardless of how much we make. If you have a billion dollars, but your neighbor have 2 billions, if you want to, compare it with others, you will still be unhappy. Okay, next. The myth is we become less happy as we age. Old people are sad. Is that true? No. It's actually the case that older people tend to be happier than younger people. This is partially attributed to the positive effect, which is the tendency for people to remember more positive than negative information with age. Okay, so what is correlated with happiness? Lots of things, it turns out. Marriage, friendships, graduating from college, so you guys are doing great. Being religious, exercise, feeling gratitude, experiences. In general, life experiences tend to make us happier than acquiring possessions does. Moments of flow, like being immersed in reading. Political affiliation. Conservatives report more happiness, but the liberals display more happiness, like they use more positive words, they smile more. But please keep in mind, much of this research is correlational. We don't know that any of these things actually make us happier. There are also many exceptions to these modest correlations. We can all think of some counterexamples. So these are by no means one size fits all. So how good are we at predicting our own happiness? The process of predicting happiness, known as the affective forecasting, is something we are really bad at. But why? Well, for one, we display a consistent durability bias in our affective forecasting. That is, we think our emotional states will persist longer than they actually do. We think that if we were to become paralyzed in an accident, that will be miserable forever. But research on people who became paralyzed shows that after an initial dip in happiness after the accident, people return to their baseline level of happiness after a few months. You would be surprised how quickly we can bounce back. It's also true that even when really incredible things happen to us, such as winning the lottery, we return to the base level of happiness before long. So we human beings adapt. This concept of being able to bounce back to baseline after both good and bad life events is known as the hedonic treadmill. Our moods adapt to external circumstances and tend to hover around a genetically influenced set point for much of our lives. For example, before we got this college acceptance letter, we anticipated that if we got in our dream school, we'll be happy, we'll be thrilled, like for months, for anyway, quite a long time. But actually, it will make us happy for a short time, several days. And then we'll return to our base level of happiness soon. So we have a set point of happiness from where we bounce up and down for a short time when we experience events. It's rarely go too further away from our set point. We always, come back after a short time. But the set point can shift after big life events and especially negative events like getting divorced, widowed, or fired from work. So let's spend a moment talking about self-esteem. We hear a lot about self-esteem on the day-to-day basis, to the point that it almost lost meaning. But let's examine self-esteem from a more theoretical perspective. Self-esteem, as defined here, is a global assessment evaluation of our self-worth. So is it better to have high or low self-esteem? It's complicated. Having high self-esteem is generally good in the sense that having a positive evaluation of our worth is correlated with greater happiness, our ability to take initiative, greater persistence, etc. It's also correlated with lower level of loneliness. But on the other side of things, having high self-esteem also carries some potential baggage. High level of self-esteem are associated with greater narcissism and aggression. In terms of many measures of life success, the evidence is pretty sparse. For example, self-esteem is not correlated with social skills, and it's not correlated whether or not you will abuse drugs, etc. Self-esteem is also related to the concept positive illusions. We tend to view ourselves more positively than others view us. Unfortunately, that's generally true. It's not flattering, but generally true. A slight positive bias may be adaptive because it lends us the self-assurance we need to take healthy risks, like ask people out for dates or applying for jobs. But when our positive bias become excessive, they may lead to psychological difficulties, including extreme self-centeredness, because these biases may prevent us from benefiting from constructive feedback. And talking about extreme positive illusions. Talking about extreme self-positive illusions, narcissism is a personality trait marked by extreme self-centeredness. Narcissism can boost risk for aggression, especially in response to criticism. Research shows that narcissistic prison inmates are more verbally aggressive when given orders by guards. Narcissistic students may punish teachers who gave low grades by providing negative course evaluations. I bet none of you guys are like that. There are, in general, two kinds of narcissists. The first is called grandiose narcissist. They're charming, they're flamboyant, they brag about their achievements. And it's a double-edged sword. They might make good impressions at first, but dislike the later. The other kind is called the vulnerable narcissist. They are introverted, they are preoccupied with self, they are oversensitive to minor criticism. In general, they lack a sense of safety. Next, we will talk about motivation. Why do we do things? First, what is motivation? Motivation is the psychological drives, our wants and needs, that makes us to go towards a specific direction. For example, if you want a good grade, you will study for your quizzes. The first theory we want to talk about is the drive reduction theory. It argues that certain drives like hunger, thirst, sexual desire motivates us to act in ways that minimize unpleasant states and to maximize pleasure. Drive reduction theory suggests that people are motivated to maintain a certain level of homeostasis, aka balance. We want to remain balanced, and usually it's like a thermostat. You set your home or dorm to a desired temperature, and the heat turns on if it gets too cold, and the AC turns on if it gets too hot. Similarly then, we eat when we are hungry, we stop eating when we are full, and don't eat again until we need to. Thus, we have drives, such as hunger, thirst, etc., that serve to minimize aversive states. These drives help us maintain homeostasis and help us avoid being unbalanced. Once satisfied, a person feels good. Therefore, drives act as a cue to action. So, if we want to achieve certain wants and needs, how much motivation is best? You may think the more motivation the better, but it's not always true. One factor that affects the strength of our drives is our psychological and physical arousal. When we have moderate level of arousal, not too much, not too little, it is usually when we are most successful. The idea of moderate arousal being optimal is known as the Yerkes-Dawson law, named after two researchers who found that people performed best and felt best when they had moderate level of arousal. And this is the Yerkes-Dawson curve. It graphically depicts this concept that moderate arousal is best, and too much or too little arousal is associated with worse performance, and it can be applied to taking tests, performing well at a sports. Simply speaking, too little arousal, not enough motivation to do our best, and too much arousal may get too anxious and choke under pressure. It also depends on the difficulty of the task, It's better for us to be highly arousal when we are doing an easy task, or else we will be super bored. And we often experience a clash between approach drive, our tendency to go towards things, and avoidance drive, our tendency to avoid things. For example, I want to eat dinner is my approach drive, but I don't want to get up and cook is my avoidance drive. I want to get new clothes is my approach drive, but I don't want to lose money is my avoidance drive. And interestingly, avoidance increases as we get closer to our goal. And it explains why we often agree to do things months in advance, only to regret them later. For example, agreeing to organize a party like a month ago. It seems a fun idea to organize a party, but as the date approach, we will realize how much work it will be, and we may regret our decisions. Our avoidance drive may increase. Next, we will talk about incentive theories. Drive reduction theories, the things we just talked about, don't tell the whole story because we often engage in behaviors unrelated to our basic drives like hunger or thirst. We didn't, go to this class because we're hungry or thirsty. So we have this interesting incentive theories. We're often motivated by positive goals, which can be either internal or external or both. So, incentive theory distinguishes between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. We can be internally motivated to do something, or we can be externally motivated to do something. So let's think about motivation to do well if we are a runner. We might be intrinsically motivated if we are driven primarily by our desire to run fast or to run long distance. But We might be extrinsically motivated if we are driven primarily by our desire to win races. It's the case that extrinsic rewards can actually end up undermining intrinsic motivation. So, for example, getting trophies for running in races may undermine our intrinsic desire to run. And there is a theory called contrast effect, which tries to explain this phenomenon. Once we receive reinforcement for performing a behavior, we expect that reinforcement again. So, what's your motivation to attend this class? Extrinsic motivation or intrinsic motivation? As anyone who has been hungry or thirsty knows, some human needs take precedence over others, and the researchers have distinguished primary needs, like our biological necessities, like food and water, from secondary needs, the psychological desires, like the desire to get good grades. Food and water is definitely more important than academic achievements. And here comes the very famous Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We need to satisfy physiological needs like water before we can care about more complex secondary needs like accomplishments in school. Now let's look at this hierarchy together. The first level is physiological needs: food, water, warmth, rest. Second level, safety needs: security and safety. Third level, belongingness and love needs is intimate relationship, friends. Next level is esteem needs, prestige and feeling accomplished. And the final level is self-actualization, is achieving one's full potential, including creative activities. The final level is the self-fulfillment needs. Well, this is a very interesting theory, but it also has some caveats. First, it's not based on biological reality, such as it doesn't have important needs like sexual or parenting drives. And this theory is definitely a good heuristic, but keep in mind that it's a little bit simplified. Our needs are more complex and interact with each other in complex ways. And it's possible to achieve certain secondary needs even if we are struggling with primary needs. We have all heard about stories at like starving artists. They're starving, but they still want to achieve their self-fulfillment needs. Okay, our last section, attraction, love, and hate. I think it's mysterious why we love another person, and it's a miracle when two people love each other. So, let's start with interpersonal attraction. Attraction is the prerequisite for love. We need to, in some way, be attracted to someone, not just physically, in order to be in love with them. And this attraction is influenced by several factors why we are attracted to someone else. First, proximity, which is our physical nearness. We tend to like people who are in our immediate surroundings. For example, we are more likely to become friends with people who live next door to us than people who live in a different building. Is it because of the mere exposure effect we talked about? The more we see a person, the more likely we are going to like them? Yes, probably. The next factor, similarity. This is the idea that the birds of a feather flock together. We like people who are similar to us, and this will relate directly to some of your chosen proverbs. The idea that opposites attract doesn't have a whole lot of support. For most dimensions, we prefer people who are similar to us rather than people who are opposite. And reciprocity is all about give and take. We like people who like us, and by the same token, if we bar part of our soul to someone, we expect them to do the same. We don't like people who take and take but never give in return. And of course, physical attractiveness is also a factor at play, and it tends to be the single most important item for men and women, although some research suggests it may be more valued by men. If we are not physically attracted to someone, we may not give them much of a chance. But, of course, there are some cross-cultural differences. In different cultures, there tend to be some different standards for beauty. There are, of course, other factors we can point at that people of all genders tend to find attractive: intelligence, dependability, and kindness all get some recognition in the literature. And love. Research on love doesn't exactly agree on what love is. Different theories have different perspectives on whether there are multiple types of love, and if there are multiple types, how many there are. One popular theory suggests that there are two major types of love: passionate and compassionate. Passionate love is what you consider a Hollywood romance. It's this sense of powerful and perhaps overwhelming longing for another person. On the flip side is compassionate love. This is the love that is marked by a sense of deep friendship and fondness for one's partner. In older couples, compassionate love may be the overriding emotion in the relationship. There is growing evidence that passionate and compassionate love are psychologically independent. Animal research suggests that sexual desire is influenced by sex hormones like testosterone and estrogen, and compassionate love is more influenced by oxytocin. Another theory about love is Steinberg's triangular theory of love. It suggests that we actually have three dimensions of love: intimacy, passion, and commitment. Intimacy means I feel really close to this person. Sometimes people say, okay, we can finish each other's sentences, we know each other's thoughts. That's intimacy. And passion, I'm crazy about this person. And commitment, I really want to stay with this person. And the different combinations of these elements result in different types of love. For example, let's see, passion and intimacy equals romantic love. Intimacy and commitment, when they combine together, it equals compassionate love. Okay, let's end on a high note and talk about hate. It's equally passionate as love. According to Steinberg, hate is basically the opposite of love in terms of the triangular theory. That is, hate is the antithesis of intimacy, passion, and commitment. For hate is the negation of intimacy. I would never want to get close to these people. And passion, I absolutely despise these people. And commitment, I'm determined to harm these people. It requires commitment. And we can learn to hate people from our peers, and we can unlearn it too by seeing the positive sides of groups we disliked. So, okay, so that's the end of today's class. We have talked about happiness, self-esteem, motivation, why we do things, and attraction, love, and hate. In the next class, we'll move to chapter 13, social psychology.